Hello, everyone. My name's Sherilyn Knapp, and welcome to Managing Workplace Conflict series, Navigating Through Conflict Tutorials. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me. Uh, and I want to say thank you to Doctors of BC and the Business Pathways program for including me in the conversation about how we navigate conflict in healthcare workplaces. I'm located in Victoria, British Columbia, on the traditional unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking people. And I want to acknowledge that and express my gratitude for being able to work and connect with you from this place and acknowledge the relationships that those people have had with the land since time immemorial. I am a little bit about me. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I practiced civil and employment litigation uh, for 15 years in Ontario before coming to British Columbia and Vancouver Island. Since 2019, I have a mediation practice or a conflict resolution practice where I do a few different things. I I'm a civil and workplace mediator. I am also a workplace investigator, so sometimes I'm called upon to look into issues of bullying, harassment, and discrimination in workplaces. I work with people on conflict resolution in workplaces and organizations. So sometimes that's providing training or coaching or facilitation to work with people around how we do conflict. The place I come from in terms of this work is wanting to really work with people to understand how conflict operates and how we can all improve our skills for how we navigate conflict in a time in healthcare, in the medical system, for physicians and the people physicians work with, at a time when things are stressful. And so having some additional skills to help navigate some tough situations can be helpful. So that's a little bit about me. And next we are going to turn to start the tutorial. Let's start with a short disclaimer. This tutorial is for educational purposes. Every conflict situation is unique. The strategies suggested here may not be suitable for all circumstances, and this tutorial does not constitute professional advice or counseling. Do seek advice from a qualified mediator, counselor, lawyer, or other professional for complex or sensitive conflict situations. The creators of this tutorial shall not be held liable for consequences arising from use or misuse of the information provided. So let's start talking about navigating conflict, and this is tutorial A. The concepts that we're going to be talking about in this particular tutorial are fleshed out in more detail in the Workplace Conflict Resolution Foundation's webinar that was recorded on February 16th, 2023. So if this conversation piques your interest and you want to go back and hear more, you are welcome to go through the Business Pathways program and find that recording and listen. And that one's about an hour, whereas this will be a shorter one where we dig into an example and a scenario to talk about some conflict resolution foundations. So the conflict theory foundations that I want to highlight in this scenario that we are about to explore are, first of all, thinking about our conflict mindset, recognizing that adversarialism or an adversarial mindset is one way to approach conflict, but there are other ways, one of which would be from a problem solving mindset. And so how we even picture and get into the mindset of how we do conflict matters. The other point I would like to highlight before we dig into the scenario is remember that conflict is multi-layered and a lot of things are going on at the same time when there is conflict. So one thing to think about is that different people have different conflict styles. We have different ways of approaching conflict and maybe different defaults. And another thing to think about is that there's the disagreement about the content of the thing, which might show up as a position someone might take, but there's also underlying interest. There's things at play that we don't see when conflict is happening in it. And a good conflict resolution problem is really digging into the interests at play as opposed to debating positions. At the same time, there can be misunderstandings. The way we communicate, um, the not just the words we say, but whether we talk a lot or a little, or how we come across to others, or maybe some of our history. And there can be all kinds of misunderstandings and misinterpretations um, between people who are talking about things and having a hard time together. There's also intense emotion often, and maybe a lot in current times. So our emotional reactions are at play when conflict is happening. And it's also important to flag that there can be power dynamics. There can be power dynamics in people's employment status, in their professional status. There can be bias, and whether it's unconscious or conscious, and there can be, yeah, different power dynamics and imbalances that also come into play. So those are a few of the things that are happening all at the same time when conflict is going on. And if we think about it only as a disagreement over an issue, then we might be missing something. So we're going to explore those concepts by thinking about them through a scenario. So the first scenario takes place within a physician group or association. And this association has a service contract with a health authority for medical services at an area hospital. Let's say there are about 15 physicians in this group. And I know that some of these groups are sort of loosely connected, and others actually have formal associations, and formal boards and that kind of thing. But let's imagine that there are 15 physicians who are part of this group. Some have been working in their area for 30 or more years and might be getting close to retirement. A few are in sort of early to mid range, 5 to 10 years of practice. And then there are a couple of newer members with 1 or 2 years of experience. This scenario focuses around Lee, a senior member who's always kind of been loud and off putting to other people, like good at their job, but turn people off sometimes. But people have noticed that over the last 3 years, they have been getting worse in terms of some of their interactions. Conflict has erupted in this group over recent decisions related to the on call schedule. Lee has had some outbursts at meetings and has written several lengthy emails to the group that others are seeing as aggressive. Senior members of this group are kind of used to Lee, but really wouldn't mind if they toned it down a little. And the newer members plan to confront Lee about what they see as abusive conduct at the next group meeting. They're looking to senior members to back them up, and they are looking to bring this to the surface and have a conversation with everybody there. Some of the senior members of this group want to keep the peace with the younger members because they're looking to semi retire soon, and they want to keep their relationships with these younger members, or more sort of less advanced in their career positions. They want to keep good relationships. But some of those senior members also think the more junior members are being overly sensitive. So this is the scenario. It's sort of an amalgamation of situations that I've been involved in working with physicians, and it's not intended to represent any particular situation other than just sort of be a blend of things that I know that physicians are struggling with. So the first question is thinking about this conflict theory foundations, what ones might be at play in this situation? And the ones that come to mind, I mean, I wrote the scenario, granted, but the ones that come to mind would be to reflect on whether there's some us and them thinking between these subgroups within the physician association, that there might be some adversarial conflict mindset, like there's a right way to see things and a wrong way to see things. And when those get pitted against each other, people end up seeing the other people or the other person or the other group as quote unquote the problem, as opposed to thinking about there maybe being an issue or a problem to discuss and solve together from a problem solving point of view. And that when we shift the dynamic into a problem solving point of view, we get access to better solutions rather than people ending up butting heads over a disagreement about quote unquote who's the problem. Another concept that's at play here is you can see that there are positions being presented, meaning um, a right way and a wrong way to behave, say, versus some underlying interests around some relationship preservation, some desire to do some succession planning, um, and and maybe like the right way to even deal with this situation. So the positions present themselves often are the first thing you see is the position, but getting a chance to think about what are some of the underlying interests is helpful. So some underlying interests often come to us, like if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or um, think about human needs to feel respected, to feel safe, to feel like they are contributing members, to feel valued. So those can be some of the underlying interests, in addition to some particular things like, needs to engage in succession planning, or needs to negotiate in a way with solidarity with health authorities and hospital administrators. So it helps as a concept to think about the difference between positions and interests. There's also a concept showing up here around some abrasion happening from conflict and communication style differences, right? We've got this Lee person who's maybe quite direct, and also maybe says, quite willing to speak quite directly in a way that other people might find off-putting. And then we've got some other styles that are possibly more harmonizing or accommodating, um, and and that there's some differences between those communication styles that is contributing to this conflict. At the same time as there's intense emotion, we see Lee who's having outbursts, who's writing angry emails. We've got another group who are really feeling impacted by that behavior, and so the intensity of the emotion contributes to whether folks can actually have a good conversation. Another concept I want to flag is like this disagreement, the fact that there's disagreements about how to do things, about how to communicate, how to meet, um, and that comes back to that difference, or thinking about things as positions. And then there's misunderstandings because people aren't understanding each other. The way they're communicating isn't working, and so they're actually not even able to identify whatever their issue might be, um, and come to better understandings because all of this is going on. The next topic I want to discuss in relation to this scenario is, okay, so how are we going to build a plan for how to address this conflict? Um, And here is my suggestion for, like, what are we going to do about this, right? We've got a group of people who want to engage in a confrontation at, the next monthly meeting. There people know this is kind of happening. There might be some jockeying in the background to gain some support. There's concern about alienating people, and there's a desire to have Lee actually address their behavior. So here's my suggestion for how an association like this might think about what to do. First thing helps is if it's an association that has a more formal structure, it might have a chair. And if the chair can take on uh, some leadership steps in terms of having some private conversations, that's helpful. In an association where it's more loose, where the relationship isn't formalized, where there isn't a chair, then it may be that someone might need to volunteer to take a bit of a leadership role in navigating this situation. And so my thinking is that this starts with private conversations with key people, with the goals of making sure people feel heard, that the person engaging these conversations takes some time to understand the different perspectives and find out something about goals, like what do people want to see happen? And then the idea would be to maybe build some capacity from the group to adapt the ways they're engaging to increase the likelihood that they're going to be heard by others. Then the second thing I would suggest would be that the group plan a facilitated or structured meeting where the people have the opportunity to first share their perspectives in a non blaming way and also be listened to. So this takes, this has to be set up with some intention. Sometimes people think like, oh, okay, we're gonna have to have a meeting about this. And then like it's just a free-for-all at the meeting, and the meeting turns into a fight. Some people say a lot, some people say nothing. People come away feeling quite dissatisfied. So keep in mind that conflict resolution needs a structure. And so putting some structure around that meeting, agree on some topics ahead of time for discussion, and so maybe it's, we'd like to set up some norms. We'd like to have a discussion and agree on norms for how we're all going to be at group meetings. And maybe it's a bit of a discussion about, okay, so, when people feel strongly about something, they will voice their concerns in X, Y, and Z way. People will take time to make sure that they're listening before they respond. We will avoid debates. Like there would be ways to set up group norms in terms of how to have this as a positive conversation. Um, and I think the purpose of doing this is it increases the likelihood of people feeling heard. People get into a debate in a group meeting, they're not going to feel heard. It is not going to resolve the conflict. The second thing we're going to try to do if we're trying to plan a facilitator or structured meeting would be to really encourage people to have the capacity to hold space for more than one perspective to be valid at the same time. So it's not an either or thing. When we can engage with things from a problem solving point of view, there's just more opportunity to say, okay, so this perspective is that perspective, and then there's this other perspective which is also valid. um and then we get on to the part about thinking about what to do about it. So that's the third point that I put on the slide here, is collaborating on brainstorming potential solutions and building a path forward together. So that takes moving the conversation from like the space of, okay, here's how I feel, here's how I experience this, here's what's not working for me, here's to moving it to here's what we would like to see happen. So that could look like brainstorming and if it's a Zoom meeting, then it's making use of the whiteboard function or a share screen where someone types notes and gets people's ideas on the screen where people can see it. Or if you're in person, you've got a note taker who's writing things down, or the good old flip chart, where people can see their ideas start to take shape. And you do brainstorming and you don't argue over it. You just do classic brainstorming of like, what could we do? Well, we could try this, we could try that. And so in this situation, what I picture would be that this group of 15 physicians who've all got some important interests and some important things to say could shift this from, instead of damaging confrontation that becomes emotional and probably defensive, um, where instead, and people feeling attacked and targeted, and some real damaging feelings that could come from it. And um, instead, there's an opportunity for people to voice what they would like to see moving forward and to brainstorm that together and maybe come up with some team norms or group norms for how they manage difficult topics, so that at the end of the day, if there's this conflict over the on-call schedule, now they've got a structure to start talking about what people need in order to do that. So I want to just finish with some resources if you're interested in learning more about conflict. Um, I've got some resources that I'm suggesting, including a book called The Joy of Conflict Resolution, another book called Difficult Conversations. People might want to look up their own conflict style and do some reading about that. So you can do that on Style Matters. And Another book that's very interesting for thinking about workplaces and in particular healthcare workplaces is called No Ego. And then finally, if we're thinking about high conflict behavior, there's a book called It's All Your Fault at Work, which helps people navigate really high conflict behavior. So there will be a list of these resources, which is part of the landing page for this recording. And I encourage you to dig in more and learn more about conflict resolution. So thank you very much for listening to this tutorial, which highlighted some conflict resolution sort of theory foundation concepts and applied it to a situation which hopefully sounded relevant. And once again, I'm Sherilyn Knapp, and my company is called Knapp Resolutions. You can find me at knappresolutions.com. And thank you again to the Business Pathways program for having me.